not usually what we call remote code execution on SSH. Remote code execution being that we can run an exploit against it and get something called a shell back. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the exploitation section. But for now, just know that it's not really common to attack SSH. So when I see SSH open, we can do some things at it. But when we talk about low-hanging fruit, and that's really what we're after as an attacker, we're going to see what's juiciest first and kind of go from there. So you'll develop your own methodology over time, but I'm going to drill into your head, at least my methodology, why I do things, and there will be several videos of walkthrough machines in this course. So you're going to get to see this over and over and over, and I'm just going to explain my methodology repeatedly so that you can get introduced to new tools and new ideas and ways of thinking. So from here, I do want to dive into my first thought process, which is I want to investigate port 80 and 443. I would either here, I would do 8443 or I'd go right after 139. So we'll do 8443 and start working towards those. Now let's go ahead and just do the first step. This is always my first step. If I see a website, I'm just going to go out to the website. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this here. And I'm also going to go into the little hamburger and go to my preferences. And I have not turned off my burp suite settings, and it's possible that if you're just following along, you haven't turned it off either. So go ahead and just select use system proxy settings, and we'll just say okay. And now we should be able to navigate to our website. I'll just open up a new tab just in case. We'll do something like this. Good, that worked. And then we'll do the HTTPS version because there's also 443. You might get something saying your connection's not secure. Just go ahead and say advanced and add an exception here. Confirm it, and you'll see this. Okay, so what we have here on both of these is we have a default web page. Now, when we talk about performing a network penetration test or even a web application penetration test, if we see a default web page like this, this is an automatic finding. Now, why is this a finding? Is it exploitable? No, not really, but it tells us a little bit of something about the architecture that's running behind the scenes, and it tells us a little bit about the client's potential hygiene. So if we see this, well, we know that it's running Apache. We know that potentially the box is running Red Hat Linux, and we're just getting ideas of what's going on behind the scenes. More so, if a client is running a default web page, it brings up two questions. One, are there other web directories behind this? So we'll show you something here in a second where we do directory busting and attempt to find a directory. Like say we're looking at this and we don't have anything to click on, but we say, /admin. Maybe that directory's there. Okay, are they hosting a website somewhere else that's just not at this IP address on this base? Or maybe they aren't hosting any website and they just left 443 and 80 open for no reason and put this default web page out there. Now, when you think about that, that signals to an attacker poor hygiene. And I'm going to think to myself as an attacker, if a company or a client is willing to just put this out there willy-nilly, what else are they doing? What potential vulnerabilities might they have if they're doing this? So this immediately signals poor hygiene. We would write this up on a test. And I'm going to show you guys my notes once we kind of get towards the end of the enumeration. So make sure you're taking good notes. And we can do that in like a little notepad here and kind of what we're doing. I think this is useful. And then I'll make a nice little keep note, or you can make a cherry tree and make your own notes out of this. And I'll show you what it looks like towards the end of the enumeration. But we can say something like 8443. And then you can put the IP address. And sometimes people like to put notes at like what time they did this. So you could see up here, it's 22:58 or 10:58 p.m. my time. And we could take that and we can just say default web page. And we can say Apache. And we could tell that it's running potentially PHP, and we'll get behind this as well. And we just have these little notes. So we know that we navigated to it, right? At least this is part of the enumeration here. And you don't have to timestamp everything. I'm just giving you that for an example. But we can see that it's running this default web page. So we have a default web page. There's nothing really for us to click on. I mean, we've got like the documentation. We can go to like, it looks like the manual might be here. And this here, we just clicked on a link and it was a bad link. Now this is also what's called information disclosure. So this will be another one to bring up. But we see here that we have an error page. And this error page is saying, hey, it's not found. Now, this is typical of what's called a 404. And when you see a 404, you think, okay, it usually redirects you to a page that's like, hey, we can't find this. This is giving us a little bit more information than we should be getting. We're seeing here that we're getting Apache version 1.3.20. So now, if we didn't know already, we do know that we're running Apache 1.3.20. And we got a host name here, Kioptrix.level1. That is a internal information host name, right? So we can get naming convention out of a client. We could potentially know how they are utilizing naming conventions on their internal networks. And we've got some version enumeration or information disclosure. So this would be a screenshot as well that we would take a picture of. And you can also notate that in your notes and say something like, you'd say information disclosure and then you could say something like 404 page, and then you would just have your notes or a screenshot of this. And then that would indicate to you what you can write up on the report and kind of where you found it. So we can click around on this page, or we can do a little bit of what I like to do, which is vulnerability scanning. So I'm going to introduce you to another tool, which is called Nikto. So let's open up a new tab. We can close these two tabs out if you've got extra tabs like I do. And this tool is called Nikto. It's just like this. So Nikto is what is known as a web vulnerability scanner. This is a great tool when you're learning the beginning stuff, when you're practicing against VulnHub, or you're practicing on a CTF or something like a Hack the Box, which I haven't introduced to you yet. But it will help you do vulnerability scanning against a website. The issue is that if the website is running good security, you might run into some issues with that, and it might actually auto block it if it detects Nikto scans. Not always. Very commonly, that's not the case. But if they've got good security or a good web application firewall, it might actually block these scans. So you have to kind of be wary when you use it, and really use your hunch if you think that this client is using a web application firewall or not. And you'll really get a feel for the client just as you gain more practice. And once you're getting in there and you're starting to notice vulnerabilities or not, you'll kind of understand whether or not they're running something like that. So from here, we're just going to say Nikto, and you can always do a -- help, but it's pretty straightforward. All we're going to do is say a -h for host, and then we're just going to say something like HTTPS, and then we'll just paste our address, something like this. And that one did not work. So let's go ahead and try HTTP and see. There we go. For some reason, it's not picking up the SSL on this. So I'm not sure why it's not discovering. But now we can see our scans kicking back. And immediately we can see that it's doing some detections here. It's detecting that the server Apache 1.3.20 is running. It sees this mod SSL with OpenSSL. It's giving us some vulnerabilities back. It's telling us what is missing in terms of protections. Now, these protection headers, if we're doing an external penetration test, not really that important. If we're doing a web app penetration test, these become more important, but we don't have to worry about them right now. So when we come through, we keep looking and we see Apache 1.3.20 appears to be outdated. Okay, mod SSL appears to be outdated. OpenSSL appears to be outdated. These are all findings. Depending on how outdated it is, a 1.3.20 to a 2.4.37 is pretty outdated. So these would be findings that we would notate on a report as well. We can look through and you can see what types of attacks this might be vulnerable to. So one, if you're looking through, there's this Apache here that says remote denial of service. Well, typically denial of service is out of scope when we're doing a pen test, so we're not interested in that. Possible code execution, so maybe interested in that. We are also potentially interested in a overflow and rewrite, and this one says this is vulnerable to a remote buffer overflow, remote being important, which may allow a remote shell. So remote meaning we do not have to be local. So I skipped over this one where you see local. This one is remote, meaning we can run that against a site sitting in our pajamas in our house, and that site's running somewhere else, and we can do this all remotely. So immediately it's found potential vulnerabilities. So we've got this potential mod SSL vulnerability, and it's come down here and it's looking at some other things. You could see that this trace method is active, and we still haven't gotten into web apps, so really don't need to talk about it too much. But trace is potentially vulnerable when you have something like cross-site scripting, which you see up here, and that could lead to something called cross-site tracing, but you kind of need both of those. But again, that's just informational at this point. You don't have to really be taking notes on that. So we're coming through. It does a little bit of directory busting for us. So what that means is it's just going to come through here and it's going to run like a word list. And that word list might have like admin, usage, manual, right? Test.php. It's got all these different items that it found doing this word list. Now we're going to do a little bit of directory busting here in a second. So we'll save this scan and we'll keep this in our notes. And we'll refer back to it here in a little bit. But what we need to know is we can Alt-Tab and we can get our text editor, and we could say something about, let's just copy and paste this line here, that potentially this mod SSL is vulnerable. So let's copy that. And we'll put that into our text editor, and we'll make that as a note. So we're still doing enumeration. We're not gonna do any exploitation until we get to the exploitation stage. So what we would do typically is we'll save this out to a file. So you might want to like copy all this right here to show what you ran. And if I could copy, that would be really useful. So you copy this and you would just make maybe a directory, and you can call this something like Chioptrix. And then we could cd into Chioptrix, and then you could say gedit nicto.text. And then you have your Nicto scan saved. So this is part of being a good pen tester, is saving all of your scans and having them available in case you need to go back for notes. So we'll save that. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna pause here. We're gonna call this part 1, and then we'll go into part 2 and talk a little bit more about directory busting and look at some other enumeration features that we have for this. And then we'll start focusing on other ports and really enumerate this box thoroughly before we work on exploitation. So I will catch you over in part 2 of this video, and I'll see you when you get over there. So now we're going to use a tool called dirbuster to do a little bit of directory busting. And there are other tools out there that are similar or do the same thing. There are 2 built-in tools, in fact. There's dirbuster, and there's also a tool called dirb, and then there is a tool called gobuster. And you have a lot of options. My option of choice is dirbuster, but I do recommend that you write these down and just explore them for yourself and see which one you like the best. So I'm going to go ahead and run dirbuster, and I'm going to run it like this with the ampersand at the end. And it's going to load up this nice little interface. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, I want to run against this target URL. I'm going to go ahead and just copy this right here and Alt-Tab back into it. And syntax is important. It's going to want the port 80 at the end. You see the port 80 here with the slash. And we're going to say, go ahead and go faster on these threads. And then we're going to go ahead and pick a list. So go ahead and go to browse. And let's go ahead and go to your base folder here. Go into your user, your USR folder, your share, which is right here. And then if you start typing word lists, it'll bring up word lists right here. And then you see Dirbuster has its own folder right here. So we're going to select Dirbuster. And from here, we can pick a variety of different lists. I like to just use the small list. If I'm not finding anything at all, maybe I'll move up to the medium, and out on the interweb is a large list as well. Let's just go ahead and start with small for proof of concept. And so now let's break it down. We've kind of talked about it in the last video, but let's just do a quick reminder. What we're doing is we're going out to web directories and we're using these word lists. And these word lists have hundreds, if not thousands, of different well-known directories. So it could be something like admin or like CGI bin, etc. And it's going to go out and try to navigate to these. It's also going to look for specific file extensions. So we know that we're up against an Apache website. Well, Apache runs PHP. If we were up against something like a Microsoft website, which is IIS, well, those tend to run something called ASP or ASPX. And so this is why enumeration is important as well, because we need to know what's running on the back end to find or make the most use out of it. Now, what we can do with these file extensions, and what I like to do, is I like to run it against PHP or whatever the base of the server is. But I also do like to run something like a text file, something like a zip file, and you can make this as long as, or yeah, as many as you want. You could say RAR, PDF, docx, but the more of these that you put in there, the more times it's going to search, because it's going to search through the word list and say the word list has admin in it. It's going to try admin.pdf or admin.zip. So it's important to limit these to what you need. For our sake, I'm just going to go ahead and just use PHP, and we're going to just scan with the default results here and just kind of see what happens. So we'll go ahead and start that, and this will kick off and start scanning, and it's already finding right away. It's finding some stuff. You can see the list getting big, and you can go to this results view where you can see what it's found. And you can also go to this tree view here and see what it's found. You can kind of click in. You can see it's found some potentially interesting files. We can go enumerate these as well. And it's found test.php page. You can right click on these and open in browser. And you can see that it's found this print test here in PHP 4. So we can look through some of these pages. We're going to go ahead and just let that go for now. It's going to take a minute. It could take up to a while to scan, depending on how big your word list is, how many options you choose, and how well your website is cooperating with your scan as well. So from here, I'm going to show you a few more things. So let's go back to our preferences. If you still have that open, go ahead and go back. And let's go ahead and just go to the settings. And we'll go to our manual configuration. And let's boot up Burp Suite. And this is just another proof of concept that Burp Suite is your friend, especially when you're looking at websites. So we're going to utilize it just to take a peek. I just want to see what's out there. So we'll go ahead and just hit next and start Burp Suite here on this. And while we wait, another thing that I need to point out is if this were a website, like a real website, instead of a test page, and a very important thing to do is view the source code. So we can right click in here and we could say view page source, and we can view the source code. Now what we're looking for in source code are any kind of comments, potentially any kind of information disclosures. We might be looking for any sort of keys or password or user accounts or anything that might be disclosed in a source code that should not be disclosed. A lot of times when you do CTFs or you do Hack the Box or Vuln Hubs, they hide little comments in source code. But in a pen tester point of view, we're looking for more important things like the passwords or keys, etc. So we've got Burp Suite open, and we're just going to go ahead and intercept one request here. And we're going to go ahead and just let this forward. Actually, we'll send this to repeater. I'm going to show you a little trick. Go ahead and send this to repeater. So you right click, send to repeater, and you'll see your repeater tab opens up here. Now, the neat thing about repeater is that repeater will show you your response in real time, and you can modify these. So you could say, hey, I want to send this here, or you could say something about Like I want to send a post request maybe and let that run. And you can see, well, it says, okay, method not allowed. So it doesn't like that. But you can send different results, modify what you see here, and see how that works for us. Now, this is not taking this exactly. So let's forward and see maybe if we're missing anything. And we're not. So another thing that we can do is we can actually copy this. And what we can do is we go into the target here. And we've got the target showing. We could set the scope if we need to. So we can go to scope here and we can just say add and then paste this in here for HTTP, and we could do HTTPS for both. But let's just do HTTP and we'll just say yes. And what this does for us is this limits only searching for in-scope items. So we're going to just limit now, and then we're going to go ahead and look at the response that came back, and you see there's no response here, but there is a 304 not modified. And the interesting thing is look at the server header. The server header is disclosing information to us as well, and we saw this in the NICTO scan. It's all coming back around, right? We saw the NICTO scan say Apache 1.3.20, and it pulled down this server header. This is why it's so useful. And this in itself, a screenshot of this right here, is information disclosure as well. So this client that we're working on has a little bit of information disclosure problems, and we can just say information disclosure here, and we'll do something, if I could type disclosure here, and we'll say something like server headers disclose version information. And we'll take a screenshot of that and we'll put that in our notes as well. So we're going to get really deep into Burp Suite once we get to the web app section. I just like to get you utilizing it and familiar with it, and just so you're comfortable by the time we get there. We're going to use it a few more times when we talk through network items, and then once we get to the web app, it's going to be a lot of Burp Suite. So we'll get very comfortable with it very quick. So let's take another peek at our dir buster and see how that's working. And you could see that it still has 23 minutes, but I really just want to put you through the concept of it. The concept of it here is that we are looking for any sort of interesting directories, and you can see response codes here as well. If you've never seen a response code, just know for now that 200s mean okay, 400s mean there's some sort of error, most typically like a 404 means page not found, and a 300 is typically a redirect, and then there's 500 which are like server errors or other. So what we're going to come in here and do is just kind of peek at these, and we can just kind of open these and see. Icons probably not that interesting. Doc has nothing in it right now. The manual is not going to be that interesting to us. Neither is usage. Maybe usage is interesting. Let's open one of these in the browser, and we can see what's kind of running. And if you have your proxy on, go ahead and turn your intercept off. You see mine caught there. Okay, and now this is an interesting page here. We can see usage statistics, and this might give us a little bit of information disclosure if we're able to access it. At least here, well, we can see a couple things. We see Webalizer version 2.01, so we can copy this and see if there's anything about this here on this machine that maybe is exploitable. So let's add this here as Webalizer version 201, and we'll just put it like on this usage.html. Now, we don't know for sure if this is running out on the web or if this is just an HTML page that has been generated by something else. So not for certain that it's actually running on this. It could just be something that they have in this usage folder, but it's always good to notate what kind of items they might be using, and they're utilizing this Webalizer for sure, at least in their network. Again, this is probably a little bit of information disclosure or information leakage here. So they've got a consistent problem with that. So let's go ahead and look more at the results, and MRTG is in here, and we can come through here and just look like what's MRTG, and we can open that in the browser. It says what is MRTG? It says multi-router traffic grapher. Okay, and we could scroll through this, read the details, and we can keep going through here, and this could very well be a rabbit hole, but this kind of makes sense. And there's a web server here, there's a log file. Let's view the log file. Nothing unique there. Let's view the web server. Let's see if it's the same page. And it's a little bit different, but not entirely different. So it's possible what we're seeing here is that what we talked about in the part 1 of this video, which is that we're seeing the test page is out there. And why was it out there, right? Is it poor hygiene? It's still poor hygiene, even if they're running a web server, but they are running a web server here on the back end. Whether this web server is useful to us or not, really don't know. So the goal through this is to dig, and this is my challenge for you, is to dig kind of through these results that you get back. So wait until your scans finish here and dig through the results. Look at all of these. To me, right now, it doesn't look that interesting, but again, we haven't fully enumerated. The real enumeration would be to go through each and every one of these and determine if there's anything of value here. Is there any sort of service information that could be useful, etc. So where we're at on the web ports at the moment, again, as a recap, we have our scan back, right? And we've seen 80's open and running Apache 1.3.20. We see 443's got the same. We also know about the mod SSL 2.8.4 and OpenSSL 0.9.6b. Doesn't hurt to copy this and put this in our notes too, because I think that's pretty useful. We've got that here. Let's just go ahead and maybe put something up above just as a note. And we ran our Nikto scan and we saved this to for our notes. So when we go write our report, we have it ready. And we've got some information here that we've written down as well. So it appears that there are some potential vulnerabilities here, but we won't know until we start digging into Google, okay? And that will be very, very important, but we're gonna get to that when we start getting into the end of this little series here, and then we get in transition into the exploitation part of the series. We'll work on exploiting these. So this is just a few tricks on how you can enumerate websites. And when we're coming through and showing you these ports, and we go over all these ports that we see, we're going to come across new ports when we do pen tests. And what it comes down to is just having a methodology. You might discover a new port, and as long as you have a methodology, that's all you need. So we're going to work on building that methodology, and you might find other tools for searching websites that you like. You might say, hey, I hate your methods, or, these tools just work better for me. And that's absolutely fine as long as you're developing your own methodology. So just start thinking about when you see a website, what are the basics that you're looking for? When you come across the website, you're looking for service version information, which we have here. You're looking for any sort of maybe backend directories. You're looking for source code. You're looking for potential vulnerability scanning with Nikto, and any sort of information that you can divulge. Same thing, we can come back here. We talked about it before with Wapalizer. You can click on Wapalizer and see a lot of the same things that we saw. It knows the operating system, it knows the web server extensions, and it knows what's running on the back end. So there's a lot of useful information here, and this is all we are after at this point. We just want to scan and enumerate, and then we're going to dig deep and exploit. So that is it for this. We're going to move on to the next port in this section. We'll do a little bit more enumeration, see what else we can uncover. So I will catch you over in the next video. Now that we've taken some time to enumerate web pages on port 80 and 443, we're going to go ahead and shift our focus over to SMB on port 139. So if you are unfamiliar with what SMB is a file share. So think about your work environment. If you go to work and let's say that you have a drive you access, that's not like your common drive, like a C drive. Maybe it's like a Z drive or a G drive, and you access that drive to get files, and you can upload the files, download the files, and then maybe some of your coworkers can also see that file share. And that's why it's called a file share. Another example is, say you have a scans folder and you go to your printer and you scan something and magically it appears in your scans folder on your computer. That's another example of SMB. So SMB is commonly used in work environments and internal environments. So when we see it, we think internal, and we think about all these exploits that I have mentioned in the past, especially with latest and greatest being MS-17010, and even though it's 2 years old, it still shows up. and it's going to show up again in this course later on. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a quick look at our scan and see what we have available to us. So on port 139 here, we see that, okay, NetBIOS, SMB, workgroup, my group, not really a lot of information. We could scroll down, and the great thing about the -A that I had you run with this scan is that it does run scripts for us. So these scripts that we're running go out and do a little bit of enumeration or additional enumeration. And here it came through and it's pulling down some information. We could see that, okay, the NetBIOS name of this is called Captrix. Well, we kind of already knew that. And we can see here that it's running SMB version 2. We really don't know that for sure or what SMB version it's running exactly. So that's really important because the type of SMB version that's running could potentially lead to an exploit, and we need to know that kind of information. So we're going to look for version information. The other thing is we're going to try to connect to this machine. We're going to see if there's any connections available to us, and if we can make that connection, if we can get to the files on the share and see if there's anything potentially malicious or that we could do potentially malicious. So let's go ahead and